Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Dravidian Does History. So, today, following the trend I started with the previous video, I thought I would discuss another book on historical fiction that I happened to read during my work vacation. This book is again another historical fiction novel set in the Mughal times and is focused on the ever gorgeous, ever interesting Jahanara Begum. This one's called The Mistress of the Throne, written by an author called Ruchir Gupta. It was published a few years ago. I came across it while I was researching for the other book, and I thought I'd give it a try as well. The first book was written by a lady, and this one's written by a gentleman, and I thought the different perspective might give it a different vibe, a different feel, and I wanted to see how that would affect the narrative of the story. And I got something that I didn't quite expect, which is a quite terrible book. There is no way of masking it, there's no way of tiptoeing around the edges of the topic. This is a horrible book by any definition. The book fails in so many different ways that I thought I should do a 30-minute discussion on it, but I don't think I have the energy for that. I just want to do a quick review just to summarize what all the problems are with this book. To start with, the writing style is quite juvenile. That's the only word I can use. It feels like something written by Stephanie Meyer, but during her teenage years. It feels like a teenage romance circa the mid 2000s, which is trying to be serious and trying to be poetic and trying to be quite literary, but failing spectacularly. There are lots of grammar mistakes, there's lots of wording errors, there's lots of syntax errors, and it doesn't quite gel well together, with the language feeling quite painfully, obnoxiously teenage in style. And I don't want to disparage teenagers because there's quite a good collection of teenage young adult books in the market. That in itself is a huge market for books, but this book does not cater to anyone in particular, because while the topic is historical, the feel is not even contemporary. It feels like a throwback to the 2000s, and that's the most damning declaration that I can say about this book. The style of writing does not quite gel well with the topic. The story doesn't progress in any kind of narrative fruitfulness. You can't enjoy the story because the writing is so daft that you end up laughing at it. Or throughout reading this book, my expression was this. That's all I can say. While at the airport, while I was waiting for my flight to Newfoundland, where I am at the moment, I got looks from the other passengers who were confused by why I was looking like I was reading something ghastly, because I was truly reading something extraordinarily ghastly. One of the problems that I found with the book is that the wording and the texture of the writing, it felt very much like a teenage girl trying to write her own diary instead of a medieval princess talking about her life. The expressions were quite modern in that sense, but there is no contemporaneity to it, there is no freshness to it. It just feels stale and clunky and quite disconcerting while you're trying to read the story of a 17th century princess who has to quickly grow up from being the principal daughter of the emperor to being the leading lady of the empire. And none of that is handled quite well. This is a story that is supposed to be one of intrigue and politics and complicated emotions, but none of that is brought forth in any convincing way. The language is just so ghastly that it beggars belief how this ever got published. I feel that the author, the earlier book, the other one that I discussed, that at least, Indu Sundareshan's book, at least felt like she had done ample research on the period and she knew what she was talking about when relating to the architecture and the people she was talking about and the period. This, it feels like the person who wrote the book, Ruchir Gupta, has no idea what he's talking about. He doesn't know any of these people, he doesn't know any of the characters, and there's quite an evident bias against the Mughal dynasty itself, which is amply evident throughout the narrative. For example, I'll read one of the sections that I highlighted. It goes something like this. We Mughals were a small tribe of nomads who came to this country. Hindustan means land of the Hindus. We are in their country. We face not east toward the rest of the country, but west towards Mecca when we pray. We are outsiders. Nothing about this country is our liking. Not the food, nor the religion, nor even the customs. Yet we are here, and we are slowly bringing more Indians to the grace of Allah. How? By convincing these people. Aurangzeb, bring Allah into your heart, and the voice that emanates from your mouth will convince all the non believers to convert. Now, this feels like something that an RSS or a BJP person would say about Muslims or the Mughals in India. The irony is that this statement is supposed to be coming out of the mouth of Arjumand Banu Begum or Mumtaz Mahal, who was the wife of the Emperor Shah Jahan and the mother of Jahanara Begum, Aurangzeb, and the Prince Tara Shukor. And she doesn't figure that much in the historical record as a person with her own opinions, because she was a royal empress, but she had lots of power. But again, being a woman in that period of time, she doesn't get any of her direct thoughts or actions recorded in history, quite in the same way as, say, a Nur Jahan, who lived a generation before her, or Jahanara Begum, who replaced her as the empress of the empire, right? So this dialogue coming out of the mouth of Mumtaz Mahal feels incongruous, because for one thing, the statement that we Mughals were a small tribe of nomads who came to this country, again, false, because the Mughals, for one thing, never called themselves the Mughals. That term was a Persian term used for Mongols in the Persian sphere of influence, and the Mughals never called themselves the Mughals. They called themselves the Gurkani, which is the term that was popularized by Timur-Ilang, who they descended from, and it is him that they refer back to when they're talking about their descent, because Timur was a great conqueror and invader, and they thought that his idea as being a Timurid prince was what was exceptional about them. That is the lineage that they focused on. They always downplayed their Mongol ancestries because they always thought of Mongols as a violent, uneducated, unsophisticated bunch of louts. So the Mughals would never refer to themselves as the Mughal, and they never did. So again, obviously the author knows nothing about it. He also goes on to say, we are outsiders. Nothing about this country is to our liking. Not the food, nor the religion, nor even the customs, which is again complete and utter bullshit. Because these are sentiments that were expressed by the first Mughal Padishah, Babur, in his diary, which is popularly known as the Baburnama. Because Babur grew up in Fargana, which is in Central Asia, and only moved to India towards the end of his life, and only managed to live in India for quite a short period of time, about 3 years. But in that period of time, this Central Asian, who's used to the Central Asian way of life, an entirely different environment, politics, weather, animals, flora, fauna, all of that, suddenly confronted with the extremely hot, wet, humid Indian summers and winters and rainy monsoons, and all the alien plants and animals he came face to face with, and the customs of the Indic cultures, was entirely baffled by it, because he lived in an entirely different world. Just the same way as an Indian who goes to Canada and suddenly is faced with toilet paper. It's the same experience. You hate it because you're not used to it, right? You feel that it is barbaric. It was the same feeling with Babur. But by the time of Shah Jahan and Jahanara Begum, these are not people who are considering themselves aliens in an alien land. These are people who consider themselves to be entirely Hindustani, who have lived in this land, which is Hindustan, which is North India, for about 100 years now. And they have accustomed themselves to Indic customs and traditions and the ways of life. A lot of Hindu rituals and daily living arrangements have seeped into their everyday lives, including the Jharoka Darshan, the weighing of the person on their birthdays, Diwali, Nowruz, which is a Persian festival, as well as Holi and all other Indic festivals. They have all joined the ranks of Mughal celebrations. The way they dressed, the way they ate, the way they talked, it was all influenced by their Indianness. So Mumtaz Mahal, who was of Persian origin, may feel slightly different towards it, but somebody like Jahanara Begum would not have felt that same sense of separation, because in the lifetime of Jahanara Begum, in the lifetime of this princess, we see how other princes who were sent off on campaigns to the northwest of India towards what is the ancestral land of the Mughals, they couldn't take the winter, they couldn't take the atmosphere, and were homesick for India, and that is recorded in the historical data. So again, it baffles me how much the author does not know about this family while he's writing a historical fiction about them. Another example I can tell you is we Mughals, she said, are to Hindustan what a veil is to a face. We can cover it with our mosques, but we can't change what lies beneath it. Again, this is based on the assumption that the Mughals built a lot of mosques and tried to convert a lot of Hindus towards Islam, which again is not true. The Mughals were a dynasty who knew that they were outsiders and were a limited number of people in a large society built on multiculturalism. They had married into Rajput families and inculcated Hindu upper caste dynasties and families into their administrative structure so that they can strengthen their hold within this land that they knew they were only guests in. Even though they ruled it, they understood that their strength lay in uniting all these different factions and having them be part of their structure. This is where Aurangzeb eventually failed. If you know your history, you will know that. But obviously the writer doesn't. And they didn't actively try to convert any of their citizens towards Islam. They didn't force any conversions. They didn't go around building mosques wherever they could. Because they were Muslims, just like any other Hindu king would build temples in their royal capitals or for special celebrations, they did build Jama masjids and other celebratory festival places and worship places during their empire, because that's how they perceived their political and religious identity, and they represented it through building architectures that reflected that. But it is also true that the Mughals spent a considerable amount of the incomes generated from their empire to the protection of temples, to the reconstruction of temples. A lot of the Rajput families who joined the Mughals were able to use the vast resources available to them because of their connections with the Mughals to enrich their own regional tiny kingdoms, which lacked a lot of resources that would not have been available to them had they not been part of the Mughal Empire. That's how a lot of the most grandest, most beautiful structures and temples in the Rajputana came to be, because of their association with the Mughal Empire and the resources at their disposal. And the Mughals actively protected the temples that were part of the empire and only went about destroying temples of the kings or of the dynasts who rebelled against them or who fought against them, and it was always used as a political tool, at least until the reign of Aurangzeb, whose reign is an anomaly and obviously led to the decline of the empire. But there is a lot more going on that we will discuss in another video in detail. Another statement that I found quite hilarious in the book is, so picture the scene. This is the scene where Mumtaz Mahal is trying to deliver the baby Gauharara, which is her last child. It's her, I think, the 14th child that she's trying to give birth to in the Deccan, and it's quite a harrowing scene. It's her death scene as she dies because of blood loss and the trauma caused by this malfunctioning birth of a child. And it's quite a tragic scene, and we see it through the eyes of her daughter Jahanara, and it should be a traumatic and quite painful experience. And the dialogue on this scene goes like this. One of them, being one of the people, Hakims, trying to help the birth. One of them bent down to look between Ammi's legs as another pushed from above. "I see the feet," one of them yelled. "We don't need the feet, we need the head," interjected another. "Well, the feet are better than the buttocks we have been seeing all along," the Hakims continued to ramble. Head, feet, buttocks, what were they talking about? What? This produced in me an involuntary laugh. I guffawed at this scene instead of feeling sadness and traumatized as I should have been, because that is the reaction that the author managed to produce in this harrowing scene. So the writer not only fails in his historical contextualization of the story, he also fails in the narrative structure, where a scene where you're supposed to feel sad, a scene where you're supposed to feel awful about the fact that this lady who has shown herself to be quite loving, quite a champion for the women, even though again that's a problematic perspective to take in this story, is dying, and her daughter is present to witness this, and it's an offhand joke that was not even intentional. So it's quite jarring. So there's a lot of these going on in this story, in this narrative as you go along. Yeah. Ooh, there's another one that I marked down. I think I should read this to you. I had always found the geography of this area fascinating. This is from the monologue of Jahanara Begum. It's her thought process. Remember, this is a 17th century princess in India, in the Islamic and Hindu world. Okay, Sati once told me the origins of the rugged northwest. These mountains were created ages untold ago when the continents were first split from the earthquake that gave the globe its current geography. The land mass that would one day become India broke off from present day Africa and floated in the Indian Ocean for several hundred years, gradually floating north to collide with Asia. To sum up, this is Jahanara Begum, the 17th century princess in her teenage years, discussing plate tectonics and how the Indian plate moved towards the Eurasian plate and collided, and that's how the Himalayas were formed. What? I don't even know what the author was thinking. Scientific knowledge was obviously popular in the Islamic world and in the Hindu world, and European sphere of influence was also starting to spread around this time. But plate tectonics were not a thing at this period. People weren't discussing how India was part of a giant landmass that was connected to Africa and Australia and Antarctica, and then broke off from it and joined Asia. This was not a conversation that was happening. It would take another few hundred years for that to happen. So this is why I feel like this book is such an utter and total failure. It fails in every aspect of being a book of historical fiction. It fails in the historical aspect of it, it fails on the fiction aspect of it, it fails as a piece of literature, and it fails as just fluffy reading, because you're left with such incredulity and just baffled by the choices that you can't even enjoy what's going on in front of you. So, in summation, all I have to say about this book, The Mistress of the Throne by Ruchir Gupta, is don't read it. Unless you want to derive pleasure from guffawing and giggling in unwanted moments of unprecedented levity caused unintentionally. Those are the only reasons that you would read this book. If you wanted to get a good laugh at the expense of the writer, this is the book for you. Mistress of the Throne by Ruchir Gupta. Thumbs down.